Tass in Baltimore usually are getting the frost off of our tails on the back end of a couple of days in Indianapolis. We called an audible and an end around here, a flea flicker, whatever you want to call it, timeout, and took off from Indianapolis this week. Luke Jones joining us here, and I tell you what, Luke, couple days down here. First off, Terps are keeping us very, very busy in the Big Ten next week. You know what a Caps guy I am. I know you watch the Wizards a little bit as well. We've been watching the Combine and John Harbaugh's comments. But beyond all of this, if the Masson Network actually functioned as it was supposed to function, we'd be sitting around here with some sort of sky cam into Sarasota every day. Instead, we're left a little bit guessing. But, I'll say this after watching the Yankees game at midnight on Monday because I was jet lagged. Spring training baseball really sucks. I mean, as an endeavor of an afternoon to sit and watch it, I think it should be on. I think we should have access to it. But there's not a whole lot to be gleaned here on a day-by-day basis to break down, some pitcher throwing 38 pitches today, right?
There's not. I mean, there just isn't. I mean, how many times have we heard the Jake Foxes of spring training lighting the world on fire, and then they're either, they get a cup of coffee and they show they can't hack it at the major league level, or they don't even get that opportunity. Last year, what were we talking about starting, probably another week or two into March, but we were talking about how Hyun-Soo Kim was looking like a disaster, and the Orioles are trying to send him to AAA.
Yeah, spring training is more about like fool's gold than anything substantial. I mean, Adam Jones had a couple of hits yesterday. Adam Jones is a really good ball player. Okay, I mean, he's healthy. Good. Let's put him in a box and bring him north.
I was going to say, put him in bubble wrap and ship him to Baltimore for a month from now. I mean, there's look, and we talk about this. This is the preseason in any sport. It's the same thing in the NFL. There's some excitement for the first preseason game, and then what happens? You kick it off. 10 minutes into the game, you realize, oh, this isn't football. This stinks.
and the beers are $10. Let me get the hell out of here, and I'm sweating.
And that's how I feel about spring training. I every game that's on, I'll watch. There's no doubt about that. You know me. Baseball is my first love. It is my favorite sport. But you get through a few days of spring baseball, and especially if you're looking at the Orioles lineup when they're on the road, and Caleb Joseph and Trey Mancini are the most notable names in the lineup on some of these road games, and you just say, all right, let's just get through the next month.
Hey, Robert Andino's getting at bats right now in Sarasota, Luke. Come on.
And how about the other day, Robert Andino got some at bats against the Red Sox, which was, I'm sure, brought back some painful memories for Boston. But speaking of pain with the Red Sox, pretty nice segue there. The news Friday, David Price going to see Dr. Andrews in Indianapolis. There's concern about his forearm. And for all this talk, all the hand-wringing about spring training, we talk about it in the preseason with the NFL. The number one objective is what? Get through the spring, get through the summer healthy in whatever sport you're talking about. And in the case of the Red Sox, we've talked a lot about Chris Tillman with his shoulder, but the Red Sox, even with that great rotation, not to say that they wouldn't be able to survive without David Price, but that kind of investment they made last year, and also seeing that he didn't have the best season last year. Velocity was down a little bit, had an ERA in the high threes, which is still good, but not David Price good. And now on the heels of that, to hear him having issues, it just reminds you about how fragile pitching is, how risky it is to give long-term contracts to pitchers, and more than anything, why it's so darn important to be able to develop young pitching. One, because they're young and talented. Two, and much more importantly, they're cheap, and you don't have that same kind of financial risk.
Oh, so you're going to need them. You know, if it's not your David Price or your Chris Tillman, it's somebody else. I find it fascinating that Dylan Bundy's out there healthy throwing the baseball on the cheap, and David Price is, going to Alabama to see Jimmy Andrews, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, we've talked about this for years. I mean, the Tommy John epidemic, and any injury expert will tell you. I know a longtime friend of the program from years ago, Will Carroll, always talks about how these first few weeks of spring are so crucial because anyone who had an issue from last year, well, you rest in the off season, and you are going to feel good once you first start working out in January and early February. But now you're getting into the meat of the Grapefruit League. You're playing games. They've been in Florida or Arizona for a couple weeks now, and now the cream rises to the top in terms of if there are some health issues, this is when you really start to see.
Yeah, are you really healthy, or were you just getting through the off season, right?
Right, and that's why with Chris Tillman, I mean, he started working out in December, and that shoulder still wasn't feeling right. Now the good news is threw off a flat mound a couple days ago, and the reports on that he feels good. So far, so good. You're still crossing your fingers. I think Chris Tillman, the Orioles are probably going to be crossing their fingers all year long, even if he ends up being fine. When you're talking about a shoulder or an elbow issue, heck, I mean, knock on wood, Kevin Gausman has, to this point, there's been no indication that he has any health issues, but, he's a guy who had some shoulder concerns the last couple years.
Yeah, I don't need to tell you about Dylan Bundy, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned Dylan Bundy. I mean, knock on wood, so far so good, but, until he shows that he can be a starter that is at least throwing 170, 180 innings a year, there's always going to be that health concern. So it just shows why you need depth and why you need young starting pitching, because it's cheaper. And, when you're invested in a David Price or think of any expensive, lucrative contract kind of pitcher who's had health concerns, that's such a huge investment, regardless of what your payroll is. That's a big chunk of commodities that you've pumped into one player, and when they have an issue like this, it just becomes that much more concerning. So, for the Red Sox sake, you hope that David Price is okay. Don't wish any ill will or health problems on anyone, but it is the latest reminder of how fragile pitching can be and why you can never have too much of it.
Well, and then you talk about fragility and are you healthy or are you not? I mean, and crossing your fingers. I mean, J.J. Hardy's all about crossing your fingers, right? I mean, and I know we've seen him there. And the Bourne thing is kind of freaking unfortunate. We've had a lot of freaking unfortunate around here. Markakis was freaking unfortunate, right? Wieters was freaking unfortunate. Machado both times freaking unfortunate. But with Hardy, it's more, if this is where you are with Tillman and Bundy's a fingers crossed, you can only have so many fingers crossed. I mean, Lord knows Adam Jones, we consider him to be durable, and last year he struggled at the beginning of the year with his health because it is very, very fleeting, as we've pointed out, which is all the more reason to figure out who else the Orioles have in the food chain here to step up and step in, and they're certainly going to get at bats over the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, and I mean, with the World Baseball Classic, I mean, you have a lot of guys that are going to be getting more Major League spring training at bats than you would expect.
Yeah, it's 35 at bats. Scope won't be getting, right? Probably 40 at bats.
Well, I mean, that's there are plenty of guys that guys like Robert Andino or Chris Johnson. Just go down the list. Gia Vitella. I mean, they're and certainly we've talked about the outfielders. I mean, the Orioles have 2 Rule 5 guys that it's going to be tough. Certainly don't expect any way that they're going to keep both of them, but if they're going to try to keep one of those guys,
which they always do, by the way,
whether it's Santander or Nuri Tavares, I mean, but those guys are going to get an opportunity, and when you have some guys that are missing from the WBC, we've talked at length about that. I love the idea of celebrating a global game like baseball. I hate the practicality of it being right smack dab in the middle of spring training and the risk of injury that you run. But these guys are going to get some opportunities, and we'll see how it all shakes out. I mean, the Michael Bourne thing, as you mentioned, kind of a freak thing. You would assume he'll be fine and good to go. Now, how he fits into that equation, I still think is intriguing. I still think the biggest key for sorting out this Orioles outfield picture is, can Hyun-Soo Kim be an everyday player, meaning that he starts against left-handed pitching? Last year, he barely played against left-handed pitching. If he can be an everyday player, then I think it becomes much easier for Buck Showalter to maneuver with that bench. And if you do like one of the 2 Rule 5 guys, maybe you can give it a go, like they were able to do with Joey Rickard last year. Assuming, and it's a big if, that guy can be a contributor. You can't just have a 24-man roster. It needs to be someone that fills some kind of role for you. If Kim can be an everyday player, I think that becomes easier. But it's this early stage of spring. It's still very much about guys getting their game clock going. We mentioned Adam Jones. Great to see him hit a couple balls out of the ballpark. What value is there? Probably not much, other than the fact that you want him to stay healthy. So, right now with the Orioles, it is very much from a news standpoint all about Tillman, all about Hardy with the back. I said this to you last year. I think it holds true even more now that he's 34. J.J. Hardy, even if everything's on track for him to be ready for opening day, I don't think you can go into the season expecting him to play 150, 155 games. I think you need to give him regular days off in a way that isn't terribly different from a starting catcher.
Dude, if you get 120 good games out of him, or
Exactly.
105 good games, because he's going to spend 2 to 4 weeks on the DL. I would give you even money on that right now this year that he's not going to make 26
even
weeks
if it's
out.
not being on the DL, it's. You know what? There have been times over the last couple of years where Hardy has played through issues. 2 years ago, it was the shoulder, big time. Last year he stayed healthy. Other than he had a freak foul ball off his foot.
He played 115 games last year.
Yeah, but as far as I think, if you can have a goal that you want him to play 130 games, and you're giving him off the day game after a night game, you're giving him off the last game of a road trip. Tacked on to an off day.
Always, every
those
time.
are the kind of things that you need to do with older players. J.J. Hardy 5 years ago was able to play 158 games, and that's great. But he was 29 years old at that point. He's not that anymore. I think Adam Jones is a guy at this point that you need, maybe not 130, but put it this way: if I'm Buck Showalter, I'm sitting down and telling Adam Jones right now, look, Adam, I know you're a gamer. I know you want to play through pain. You've done it on a number of occasions. I want to give you 2 days off per month, or a day off every 2 weeks. However you want to do it to try to keep him a little bit fresher. I'd rather have an Adam Jones closer to 100% who plays 149 games as opposed to an Adam Jones who is trying to push through nagging injuries, and maybe that hurts his production. I mean, it's just the reality is, especially with Hardy, you have Manny Machado, who can, at the very least, play above-average defense at shortstop. I think that's clear. Is he a Gold Glover at shortstop? We don't know. We haven't seen Machado play at that position.
He might be a Platinum Glover at shortstop for all we know, right?
Yeah, he could be, but the point is you have someone who can clearly handle that position, and yes, I realize if that happens, then you're looking at putting Ryan Flaherty at third base. But if you're talking about just an isolated game here or there, Flaherty's going to play good defense. You can deal with that. You have a lineup that you should be able to have a guy like that in the lineup, once a week or whatever it ends up being, and it shouldn't cost you ball games if he's going to play good defense. So, they have the means to be able to give a guy like J.J. Hardy some regular time off every now and then, and I think that's the way they need to go. I know, I asked Hardy about it. I think it was last year at FanFest if some regular days off would do him good, and he even acknowledged that. So, when a player's acknowledging that, that's something that you should be able to do, especially if you feel good about your depth. So, that's the reality when you start talking about guys that are on the other side of 30. You can win with older players, but I think, Buck Showalter, and we've talked about this. I know you've talked about it with Alan McCallum. I've talked about it with Alan over the years. Buck is a guy who, his horses that he knows he has, he rides them hard. And I think at times you got to pump the brakes a little bit, not because you're afraid of a guy going on the DL, but it just keeps someone fresh. This is a town we talk about Cal Ripken and the streak and everything. I think even Cal, all these years later, would probably acknowledge that if he'd gotten a few more days off here or there, might have been a better offensive player over the course of the full 6 months of a season. But if you have some players that you trust to come off the bench, if you have someone like Manny Machado can slide over and not miss a beat defensively, really, at least for a game here or there, then there's no reason not to do it because, as you said, if you can get a J.J. Hardy for 130 games, that's far more productive than trying to squeeze 150 games out of him and having him play through injuries and fatigue. I think you have to kind of hedge your bets a little bit. And when you have a team that has some guys that are on the other side of 30, I think you have to do more of those things.
He is Luke Jones. You can follow his journey at Baltimore Luke on Twitter as well as at WNST.net, covering all things Orioles, Ravens, and the Terps this weekend, playing the Saturday 2 o'clock tip-off as well. We've been monitoring the Combine, but we're on the spring training right now, even though things have been relatively quiet. They don't put enough of the games on TV, which still boggles my mind. I mean, it absolutely boggles my mind. But, again, 25 years into this with these goofs that own the team, who knows? Tyler Wilson and Mike Wright are two guys that, banged around last year in the spring, early on, high hopes. I don't know that they're high-ceiling guys, Luke, but I do know that they're going to make starts. They're going to make appearances, and if somehow they could solidify themselves as a 4 or 5 major league starter and take the ball every fifth day, I know that would make Buck happy. That would make, and you really push Jimenez. I mean, that one of them could be a better option because this just in, Luke, I don't trust Ubaldo Jimenez.
I don't trust Wade Miley either, quite frankly.
Perfectly.
But, I mean, the reality is guys like Tyler Wilson and Mike Wright, and throw Vidal Nuno in there, Gabe Yanoa, Logan Verrett. I mean, these are all starter types, meaning they can give you some innings. It doesn't mean they're going to be good innings, but they're all guys that are going to fit into that fringe Norfolk shuttle, long relief, spot start, number 6, number 7, number 8 starters. And we know that inevitably the Orioles are going to have some health concerns. And, Chris Tillman, even best case scenario, is not going to be ready till the end of the first turn of the rotation to start the regular season. I mean, when you know that, chances are he probably is going to start on the DL and probably is going to miss a start or two. So who does that become? And certainly we've seen flashes from Mike Wright. We've seen flashes from Tyler Wilson. Tyler Wilson had about a 2-month stretch early last season where he did an all right job. At one point, if you remember, he was kind of their number 3 starter because the way that the state of their rotation at that point in time. And Bundy was still in the bullpen.
And they were a bad team at that point,
Yeah, it's just that's where they were. So you're going to need some contributions from these guys, whether it's whoever's filling the Vance Worley kind of role, whoever's making a spot start.
By the way, they're going to miss him. That's a prediction.
Well, yeah, I think that's a fair assessment to make. But at the same time, these guys that they do have, and Vidal Nuno is a guy I think who can give them production like that. He's done it at the major league level in a relief role and pitched okay. He's not a high upside guy.
Yeah, he's 30 years old. He is what he is. I mean, I don't think we're going to catch lightning in a bottle.
He's a left-hander. He has an option remaining. That's the difference between a guy like him and Worley. If you keep in mind, Worley did not have any options last year, so it did get difficult when that bullpen was taxed, whether it was because of a rain delay, doubleheader, couple starters getting bashed, 3 out of 4 games, a starter gets knocked out early. And we know that Norfolk shuttle gets going then. The difference is all of those names that I've kind of mentioned that are in that group, Nuno, Verrett, Yanoa, Wright, Wilson, they're all players that have options remaining. So it makes it a little bit easier now that in your bullpen you could have at least a long reliever that's always you're going to have that option to send down. Now, if it's someone who's pitching well, you don't want to necessarily have to send them down, but if you don't have a choice, you at least have that flexibility. But, I'm with you on Vance Worley. I mean, he was, not a game changer for them, but he was certainly a guy that gave them a lift on a number of occasions where, even if it was someone like a Mike Wright or a Wilson getting knocked out in the 3rd or 4th inning because it was a 4-3 game, Worley was able to keep them in a position where they still had a chance to win, gave them some length, and you were able to maintain the health of your bullpen then, in addition to having a chance to win. So, it's a fine line. We talk about this all the time. 162 games, we know how Buck Showalter's going to operate. He's not going to compromise the long-term well-being of his bullpen just to win that night's game. You can't manage like that over the course of a long season. The postseason, how you manage that way is a lot different. So they need these pieces, and they need to have bullpen pieces that they can shuffle in and out and send to Norfolk or send to Bowie for a short term, whatever it is. They need to have those kind of guys, and they at least have that. They have inventory. I caution to call it depth because the jury's out on most of those names as far as whether they can even at least be effective long-term relievers. So, it's there. You're going to have to count on them at some point. It's no secret Mike Wright needs to develop some better secondary stuff. I think the fastball is very clearly major league caliber. He's a guy who throws in the mid-90s, but he's got to have some secondary stuff that looks good. Tyler Wilson, I love his makeup. I think he's a guy who, the big question with him is the stuff going to be good enough? I mean, early last year, he was able to be around 89, 90 miles per hour, but then as the year went on, you could see, and they even acknowledged that physically he broke down a little bit. Not that there was an injury, but he's a slight guy. He's not very big and doesn't throw very hard. So that's where probably looking at him as more of a long relief kind of guy because you do question stamina and a guy that size not having overwhelming stuff. That probably not a guy who's feasible to be a starter. But if you're in a bind and someone goes on the DL and short term and is only going to miss 2 or 3 starts, Ty Wilson might be someone you throw in there and might be able to give you a good chance to win. So they're as you said, they're going to need these guys at some point. You hope they don't need them that much as starters at least, but they're going to. These guys are all going to have a chance to contribute. Buck always likes to say, and Dan Duquette says, the Orioles maybe they'll talk about they won't have the highest payroll, but they will out opportunity other organizations, and those fringe guys that frankly every organization needs. I mean, no team has 7 or 8 great starting pitching.
Yeah, the Red Sox are going to find out what they need now that Price is going to see Mr. Andrews.
So,
right?
Great depth is an injury or 2 away from being a major problem. So in the case of the Orioles, it's they need, of those 4 or 5 fringe guys that I mentioned, they need at least a couple of those guys to be able to pitch effectively, whether it's back end of the rotation or whether it's long relief or both. They need at least a few of those guys to emerge to be acceptable. Vance Worley, that kind of a category, that kind of a caliber of player. Not a guy that's going to make 30 starts, but a guy that might have to make 6 or 7 starts and pitch out of the bullpen as well. They're going to need a few of those guys to be effective for this team to have a good chance to win this year.
Well, last thing for you, and I must say that I was up jet lagged in the middle of the night seeing Zach Davies in a Brewers jersey talk about starting on opening day and wondering what the hell Gerardo Parra is doing right now.
Yeah.
But back to your Buck Showalter point, this is one of the reasons spring training's not as much fun as it used to be for me, because we used to sit around here, right, and tell a little story. I'll get you up on my lap, little Luke. In 1995, when you were 11 or whatever it was. I was pulling fax machines literally at 3 in the afternoon on my afternoon show. Literally, the Orioles would fax me, Rick Vaughn, fax me the box score, from whatever hellhole they're in Land O'Lakes or wherever they're, baseball city, wherever they're playing today, right? And it used to really mean something that, I don't know, Delino DeShields got 2 hits today or something like that. I don't feel that way, and I know maybe there's a small contingent of nerds that still are really over the top about spring training, but in the Buck era, even who they come north with doesn't matter. I remember they used to play that game down at RFK Stadium before the Nationals were born, before Mr. Angelo's birthed the Nationals. And it was like, are they going to take, Mark Williamson or Todd Froworth or whatever it was? And it was like it was a big deal, if a guy went to Rochester because he was sort of relegated there to like June, who comes north and who doesn't. There's not that much drama with it because we all have seen how incredibly fluid it's going to be. I mean, there is no hard and fast who's coming north with the team, so that kind of takes a little bit of the drama out of it for me.
It does, and a lot of that has really, that's not even a Buck Showalter and Orioles exclusive.
It's a 2017
That's just the way the
thing.
game's played.
Sure.
Now. I mean, starters pitch fewer innings than ever. You have more specialization, more reliance on bullpens. This model, I mean, Brian Kenny on MLB Network, he wrote a book and even talked about the concept of bullpenning. And it's this whole idea that you do have a lot of flexible pieces in order to do this, where you have AAA and AA and guys that are shuttling to the major leagues, and you're using them for some innings, and you shuttle them out. I mean, it's a big operation, and it's probably only going to get worse, Ness, unless they make changes to limiting the number of pitching changes or making a minimum number of batters that each reliever has to do. And I'm not saying I even endorse that per se, but we're seeing this increased specialization. We've seen it dramatically in the postseason. Now, the question is, where's that balance? Where's that fine line? But we're seeing it. I mean, it used to be, even the Orioles, go back to the Orioles of the early 90s. Go and look at those, and the 1991 Orioles, for example. They weren't, that was a dreadful team, but I guarantee you, go look at those starting pitching innings, and you'd be surprised how many innings those guys still pitch as opposed to what you see today around baseball.
Which is when Jimenez stinks on May 15th, he's done. He's gone.
Yeah,
that doesn't even matter if you're paying him $12 million a year.
Animal. I mean, that 91 Orioles team, they still had 4 different pitchers who threw at least 120 innings, and none of those guys had an ERA below 4. But it just kind of shows that was kind of the expectation then. Even if you were bad as a starter, you were going to be asked to go at least 5 or 6 innings. Now, if you're bad on a given day, you're typically lifted in the 2nd, 3rd inning, something like that, depending on how a bullpen is, the state of a bullpen on that day. So
and more than that, you've screwed up Norfolk because they're going to have to if they're on a road trip and got a doubleheader on Thursday night. That 2-inning start becomes a problem for 3 or 4 games and for a week for Buck and for Dave.
Exactly. So that's why and Buck talks about this, and it's one of his cliches. But when you look at the Orioles, it absolutely.
Are you getting worn out on Buck's message, Luke Jones?
No. It's just I know the Buckisms at this point. Hey, Zach Britton gaff aside. In the wild card game. And look, I hope everyone, and I mean everyone talking throughout baseball, the idea is not to just have your closer come in a save situation. The idea should be to have your best reliever come in the absolute most critical juncture. And you know what? That's not always the 9th inning. It might be the 8th inning when you're trying to protect a 1-run lead and 2 men are on and the heart of the order is coming up. That should be the save situation that night. Now, I'm not expecting it to change necessarily, but that's where managers, that's where baseball should be headed. The idea of a fireman 30 years ago, when you think of guys like Suter and
dude, I argued how stupid that was from the minute I got on the radio in 1991, man. Back in the 90s when baseball really mattered and we had those kind of conversations, I was forever like, why do you want to pay, no offense, Greg Olson or, Lee Smith or, Doug Jones, or why do you want to pay those guys to sit around and come in the 9th inning and pad their stats to get 52 saves in a season?
Right.
I didn't get it.
And here's a real easy example. The bases are loaded. You're trying to protect a 1-run lead, and the 3, 4, 5 hitters are coming up for the opponent in the 8th inning. You're telling me you'd rather go with? And look, the Orioles are in a good spot because they have some other guys.
Because you could say Brad Brock or Darren O'Day, and I would say, sure, go with one of those guys.
Yeah,
because they do have a stacked bullpen. It's a strength of their team.
But let's just say Brad Brock and Darren O'Day have both pitched. Have already pitched 2 of the previous 3 nights, and they might not be available. Because that's the one thing with the bullpen. You always have to maintain health, and Buck is excellent at doing that, has been throughout his time here in Baltimore. But if it's a case where you have that, and you decide, well, I'm not going to go with Zach Britton here, and you're just hoping that Zach Britton has a save situation in the 9th, why not use him in the 8th? Because for all you know, Zach Britton gets out of it, and then Chris Davis hits a 3-run homer in the bottom of the 8th inning. And guess what? That 9th inning situation that might have been a 1-run lead is now a 4-run lead, and now it's not even a save. The biggest, it's funny because you know me, I get to the off season, I start reading my baseball nerd books, things like if they would just eliminate the idea of a save, just eliminate the stat. And look, it's not going to happen. We know the Players Union would never allow that.
Yeah, the game would be played a different way.
Because the pricing for relievers would become different, at least for a short time. But if you would eliminate that, then those chains would come off of managers, and you would just say, you know what? This right here in the 8th inning is the spot for my best reliever, and I'm going to bring him in because there's not going to be a bigger moment in the game than this. And if he gets out of this, then I'll roll the dice with someone else pitching in the 9th inning if I don't want to send him out there for the 9th, protecting even if it's still a 1-run lead and there's no one on base, but it's the bottom of the order now. That's a way different animal than what you're dealing with in the 8th. So I guess, long story short, I hope Buck and I hope everyone around baseball, anyone who's making those kind of decisions, you see what happened with Zach Britton against the Blue Jays. You hope guys learn from that. You don't.
Well, it set the tone for the whole postseason.
Yeah,
it changed the way the postseason was managed by all of them. And I don't think there's any doubt about that. If you saw how Chapman was used, how Miller was used, for sure.
And in fairness, we'd seen that. Ned Yost was doing that with his bullpen with Kansas City. We were seeing.
But he had 3 different guys.
Right,
I mean, when you have one guy who's your stud, the Padres would have played the World Series differently with Trevor Hoffman in 2017 than they did 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, and it might have made the difference in winning another game or 2 in some of those series of the past. I mean, it's just. Again, the Orioles are in a great spot because they do have 3 or 4 guys that you feel really good about, guys that you feel good about pitching in high leverage situations. But when it comes down to it, and it's not always easy. That's what managing shouldn't be easy. Managing should be a tough job. That's why they're paid money to make those kind of decisions. But you should be able to identify if there's a huge situation in the 7th or 8th inning, the bases are loaded, you're trying to protect a 1-run lead, the opposition's best hitter is up. That should be the spot right there for your best reliever. And, you'll figure out the 9th inning when you get there. And that just goes back to what we talked about in that Toronto game. It was, I would have gone with Zach Britton maybe even in the 8th inning. But I can at least stomach Brad Brock because he had a great year. And even Darren O'Day, who's coming back from the shoulder, is still someone that you have a lot of trust in because he pitched at such a high level for the last 4 or 5 seasons. But when it got down to, you're talking about Dunsing and Ubaldo Jimenez pitching, and you still have Zach Britton out there, I mean, that's just wrong. And I love Buck, and he knows a lot more about baseball than me, but I feel very strong in my humble opinion, but it's still a strong opinion, that he absolutely was wrong not to use your best reliever, and instead you're going with the starting pitcher in that spot. Again, long story short, I'm over that. I hope everyone can learn from that because there's a better way, there's a more efficient way to use a weapon like Zach Britton than just automatically, no questions asked, has to be a save situation in the 9th inning. It's not the best way to maximize your best pitcher on your roster.
He is Luke Jones, Baltimore Luke, and we have a season-long of that, a year-long, a lifelong argument going on about the great game of baseball. The Birds are down in Sarasota. We're watching the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. Obviously, the Terps, the Caps, the Wizards all playing this weekend as well. You can find me, Nasty, at WNST.net. I'm also out in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day. From anywhere in the world on your mobile device, just download the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear. Any breaking news with the Ravens, with free agency, with the Orioles down in Sarasota. If I'd like to send out a text on the David Price situation, but we only do local breaking news. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard, and Dennis Kolatzis is here this Thursday, next Thursday, every Thursday from 3 until 5 doing the SSV on WNST. Let's see, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and our WNST road trip to London now on sale, and yes, we have space. Throw me an email, nasty@WNST.net, or click on the road trips tab at WNST.net, and we'll get you going on that. I think that's about it. Oh, head coach Barry Trotz joining us on March 20th here in Baltimore for a Rock the Red night. We're going to swab for the Bone Marrow Registry and for There Goes My Hero as well. Caps are doing pretty well. They've had a pretty big week. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.